A Texas teacher has been arrested and is now out of a job after police say she engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a student. The student was reportedly in high school, while the suspect is a 25-year-old woman. Police allege that sexual activity between the teacher and student happened multiple times. She was locked up and put behind bars, and the school district banned her from school property. I'm your host, Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details, including what led to her arrest, what the district is saying, and what legal consequences she could be facing. For this story, we go to Mullen, Texas, a small town located about 2 hours outside of Austin. A young educator, early in her career, has now been fired, arrested, and permanently banned from campus grounds. Police say 25-year-old Lily Janek was put behind bars last week, charged with having an improper relationship between an educator and a student. At the time, Janek was both a teacher and a coach for Mullen Independent School District. The allegations date back to November of 2024, when police first received a report suggesting an inappropriate relationship between Janek and a student. According to records obtained by KABB, Janek allegedly invited the student to her home on multiple occasions where sexual activity reportedly took place. Investigators say those claims were backed up by interviews by the person who made the report and allegedly by admissions made by Janek herself. In a statement from the district, Mullen ISD confirmed they received a formal letter from law enforcement about the alleged incident on April 4th. School officials say they immediately reported Janek to Child Protective Services, suspended her from duty, and banned her from all school property and related activities. Just days later, the Board of Trustees voted to officially terminate her employment. The superintendent also filed a report with the Texas Education Agency. Janek was arrested, fingerprinted, and booked, her mugshot now part of the public record. At the time, authorities have not released the gender or grade level of the high school student involved. Mullen ISD says additional counseling services are being offered through the school psychologist and are available to all students and their families. In a statement posted online, the district wrote, quote, "While we are sickened by the conduct of this former employee, we know that this incident is not a reflection of the many exceptional educators teaching in classrooms across the district. We are committed to supporting the students and families impacted and ending the school year strong for our children." Right now, it's still unclear the specifics of this alleged relationship, how long it lasted, and how Janek was allegedly caught. And joining me to talk more about this is Susan Soto, a Texas attorney with more than a decade of experience in civil litigation. Susan, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just jump right in. Is this charge considered a felony in Texas?
I can't address the criminal law side of things because I am a civil litigator, but I can say that this teacher is facing dual tracks of problems. Not only is she facing some issues in the criminal justice system stemming from the charges of an inappropriate relationship with a student, she's also looking at some administrative law consequences through the Texas Education Agency for her Texas teacher certification.
Tell us more about that.
When a teacher has committed a crime and it is reported by the school district, then that teacher's teaching certificate is flagged and an investigation ensues through the Texas Education Agency, who performs the investigations for the State Board for Educator certification. And the investigative team will talk to witnesses, examine evidence, and then make a recommendation to the State Board for Educator certification on that teacher's certificate.
Does the age of the student change the severity of the charge?
On the civil side with the administrative law, no, it does not. Now, that does have an effect on the criminal law side, but any teacher who is suspected of or accused of, or in this case, confesses to an inappropriate relationship, it's a breach of that trust that the public has put in a Texas public school teacher, and so age doesn't matter.
And I know you focus mostly on the civil side, but is Janek likely to face federal charges in additional to state charges?
It's certainly a possibility. At this point, we haven't heard a whole lot about the criminal justice side, but it is a possibility.
Could she potentially also be added to a sex offender registry if convicted?
Absolutely. And she would
And
also
does
be
it,
on a no hire list for Texas schools. I'm sorry.
no, you're fine. You're fine. Tell us more just about that. With losing the teacher's license, there's a chance, and especially if she's on the sex offender registry, her career is just thrown away essentially if she's found guilty.
Because Texas teachers are held to a higher standard than the general public, she is facing those dual legal issues, criminal and administrative. In Texas, the range of punishment for any infraction of the Educator's Code of Ethics, which is codified in Texas law, the range of punishment could be anything from a suspension of a teaching certificate to revocation to simply a reprimand. But in this case, especially since she has confessed to the offense, I think we're looking at revocation of her certificate.
Can prosecutors charge her with sexual assault of a child or only improper relationship?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there are several charges that they could look at.
Can you explain, how does CPS get involved in a case like this?
One of the mandatory reports through a school district is to CPS, although anyone in Texas is free to make a report. So if the student's parents were concerned, they could make a report to CPS, which is Child Protective Services. Another teacher could, anyone can certainly make a report, and those reports are to be anonymous. Teachers, colleagues who might have known about this inappropriate relationship do have the legal duty to report to CPS because in Texas, people who hold professional licenses like a teaching certificate are required to report things to CPS. They don't have to prove those things and they don't necessarily have to have direct evidence of those things. But the suspicion that a violation has occurred is enough to impose that duty on an educator, and then it's on CPS to then go ahead and investigate to either substantiate or close the case.
Could the school face liability if it's proven that they missed any warning signs?
Likely not. School districts are pretty much immune with just a couple of exceptions. And looking at the reports that I've reviewed about this particular case, it looks like the school district did everything it should have done under the Texas Education Code. They did investigate, they reported not only to law enforcement, but to the Commissioner of Education, which is something that over the years has developed into a duty by the superintendent. Over the years, the duty to report and the way teachers who have inappropriate relationships with students is dealt with has really increased in severity. Um, there used to be no penalty, and teachers who either uh, directly were known to have had inappropriate relationships or perhaps other infractions of district guidelines were passed around from district to district. It was a favor from one superintendent to another or one principal to another. However, Texas has passed a series of legislative actions where not only now is the teacher who commits a violation facing certainly more severe penalties, but people who know about it now and who don't report face severe penalties, and their teaching certificates are also on the line. So it looks like in this case, the school district did do everything it was supposed to do.
And in addition to being an attorney, you also have experience in the school system. You said you were a principal for years. Could you just walk us through, when a principal gets this news from police, how it's handled?
Sure. So, if a principal gets this information directly from any sort of law enforcement, then the first step would be, of course, to pull that teacher from her classroom duties. Of course, alert central office if central office hasn't alerted the principal of the problem. And then an internal investigation is also occurring at the same time that law enforcement is investigating. That teacher is normally put on what we call administrative leave because there are still some due process rights that teachers have, even though they're held to a higher standard ethically and in performance issues like this. They are put on administrative leave while the investigation is pending. And then pending the outcome either of that investigation, or in this case, perhaps her confession, or perhaps the outcome of law enforcement's investigation, then an employment determination would be made at that point. I was looking at some of the information surrounding this school district, and I was interested to see that the latest data in Texas for Texas public schools is from the 22-23 school year. 24 school year is not out yet. But 23 data shows that in this school district, which is very, very small, last count it was about 200 students, over a third of the teachers in that district in the last reported year are teaching 5 years or less, which means if this has happened in such a small community, then the need, especially for training for teachers who are, especially in high school classrooms, almost the same age as their students. And we don't know much about the student at this point, who was the victim in this case. But young teachers fresh out of college perhaps need some additional training and need some guidance. It's not enough to just assume that their ethics and their morals are going to guide them to not get involved. It looks like as the laws are progressing, and this is still a pervasive problem even with these more strict laws in Texas, that campuses and school districts are going to have to do some additional training. So speaking as a former campus principal, I certainly would make that part of my beginning of the school year training, and say it directly to those teachers.
Now we are, this is going to trial. We know that the suspect is innocent until proven guilty. If she is acquitted, could she sue the district for firing her, or is it they just follow the protocol? Because it only took about 3 days for them to make the decision to let her go.
It is unlikely that she would have a successful lawsuit against the school district. Can she sue? Absolutely. Anybody can sue for anything. However, the question is, would it be a viable lawsuit? Because of the immunity that school districts in Texas enjoy as a quasi-governmental entity, it's not going to go very far. There are certainly board policies that she violated. She confessed to having this inappropriate relationship, whether she's convicted in a court of law or not. And then we also have the question of her Texas teaching certificate. If she loses her certificate, then that termination was valid. If she violated an internal policy, that termination was valid. She does have the opportunity to appeal that termination through procedures that are laid out in the Texas Education Code. But would she have a viable lawsuit if she's found innocent? I highly doubt it.
Now we just touched on this earlier, but is there any way that school districts can better screen educators, or for red flags?
They already do criminal background checks as part of the hiring process. And of course, they look, if they're coming from another school district, they're going to look to see if that was an instance where somebody with a problem was just passed along instead of handling the problem. However, I don't know in this case or in any case if there really is a red flag. Sometimes there isn't. It's just when that teacher gets into the classroom situation and singles out a student who could be either groomed or targeted for an inappropriate relationship, that's when things start to happen, which is why that training, that professional development, touching base throughout the year and making sure teachers know not only what the boundaries are, but what to do if you feel like those boundaries are being tested.
And let's talk more just about those boundaries. Like, what should teachers know? Okay, you can only take things so far. And if you're starting to feel uncomfortable, like, can you give us some examples of what they should be looking out for?
In this day and age, as a former educator and now an attorney, my recommendation would be do not do anything that could cause a question or a raised eyebrow. Do not close your classroom door if you have a single student in your classroom after school during the lunch break for maybe tutoring or extra help or even mentoring. Certainly, do not contact students by social media means. Do not call them. Do not allow them to send you messages after hours. Just don't do things that will raise a question. If it sounds unreasonable, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
And is it a little tricky, with high schoolers, especially in this day of social media? They can find their teacher on Facebook or Instagram within 2 seconds, and maybe they're requesting to follow them. Maybe they're sending, DMs or pictures. Just explain just how things have just changed over the course of years with social media.
Just the advent of social media, and certainly all of the platforms that have been presented for especially high school students to use, they've got so many choices, and so many of them are without parental controls, that it becomes a decision for the teacher whether or not initially they even should be or want to be on social media if they're dealing with children of a high school age. And certainly, kids are in bed late at night, parents are already sleeping, but they're the ones who are sending those DMs and doing the Snapchats and all of the things. And then it's again up to the teacher to put a stop to that, because ultimately, not only do they have that professional responsibility, and frankly, their certificate could be on the line, which they've worked hard to earn, but they are the adult in the situation. And it comes down to the best interest of that student and of that child, because those children are entrusted to that teacher in that classroom, and things do bleed over outside of the classroom. That's why teachers are responsible for children on field trips, at football games, and certainly they should not be doing inappropriate things after hours in the middle of the night, which is certainly not an appropriate hour for any kind of communication with a student.
And earlier you touched on sometimes, teachers, they may get passed around from district to district and some things just may go unnoticed. Can you explain how that even happens?
I would say at this point in the chronology of Texas legislation, for something as severe as an inappropriate relationship with a child, it won't happen, because now the superintendent and other reporters are required to report that instead of passing that teacher around. However, I can certainly assure you that it's still happening in Texas public schools, and probably private as well, where if a teacher has a different kind of an infraction, or is just difficult to work with, or doesn't get their lesson plans in on time, or doesn't have good classroom management, those certainly are not things that need to be reported necessarily. And rather than go through all of the steps that are required to either terminate a teacher during a contract or non-renew a teacher's contract at the end of the school year, it might just be easier to let that teacher move on. And it does happen, unfortunately.
And at this time, we do not know the age of the alleged victim, but what there haven't been any statutory charges filed as of yet, from what we know. If we find out that the victim was 18 years old, could she still, that teacher, lose her license just because it is an improper relationship, or are the waters a little murky because this is a person that is of age?
Sure. No, that is still crystal clear. As long as a student is enrolled in the school system, they are a student of the district and they are off limits. So it does not create a problem if the student was 18. Um, a lot of kids are 18 their senior year in high school for sure. And so that certainly wouldn't affect her employment or her certification issues.
The school district released a statement saying that they are bringing counselors and psychologists in, for families to speak to. What role do they play, and does that help?
It does help, especially in this circumstance. The school district is very small. We're talking about around 200 students, kinder through 12th grade. Very small. So the students had a greater opportunity to interact with this particular teacher than, let's say, in a huge urban school district, where there are so many teachers and so many students that nobody knows anybody. So in this district, I would suspect that a lot of students were exposed to this teacher. They are probably, if they're younger, they're frightened. They've heard rumors. If they're older, they're wondering what to do with their feelings as well. So when you bring in counselors and other professionals to help in whatever kind of a crisis situation it is, whether it's a death of a faculty member, whether it's after a school shooting, or in this case, when a teacher has committed an inappropriate act or acts, the professionals are trained certainly in helping children deal with their feelings, answer their questions, and certainly adding tools to their toolkit to be able to navigate this scary and probably new experience. It's so rare, thank goodness, that children have to face this kind of an incident that they really are not prepared. So it does help to bring professionals into the school setting. Absolutely. I'm glad that they're doing that.
As a former educator, what advice do you have just for the leadership of that school, after going through such a major scandal, especially because, like how you said, this is a very small town, very small school. How do they get past this?
They're going to have to regain a lot of trust. It doesn't matter if there are only 200 students, there are then parents of those 200 students who have lost a lot of trust very quickly. So I think they're going to have to regain some trust from the parent side, certainly do some work with them, perhaps offer some information sessions or roundtable groups so that parents can talk about their concerns and the school can be transparent about what plans and safeguards they've put into place to make sure this doesn't happen again. Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, on the staff side, staff has got to be told in no uncertain terms that this is not okay, not appropriate, but don't stop there. Then give them the tools. If this looks like it's happening, if you are not sure if what's happening is appropriate or not, what do you do about it? Teachers need those tools too, especially if they're in their early 20s, fresh out of college.
And some of those plans and safeguards, that's the leave the doors open, right? And just not communicating with them via phone, via social media.
Right. Those would be two tips that I can offer right off the top. There's a lot of controversy across the country right now about teachers communicating with parents to tell them what's going on in their children's lives. This, I think, would be a perfect opportunity for the school to communicate with the parents, certainly without violating children's rights of any kind, but letting the parents know this is the text message or this is the DM that I received from your child at 1:30 in the morning. You need to know this is going on. Let's work together to redirect this behavior.
And I know, times are changing. I think I probably had one of my teacher's phone numbers when I was in high school. But is it possible, do you think, that just communication like that should be cut off because it could cross that line? Or is it just unrealistic in today's day and age to say, no, a student shouldn't have a teacher's phone number or shouldn't be able to contact them after school?
I cannot think of an instance where a student would have to contact their teacher after school. If they have questions about a homework assignment, there are other platforms that can be used. And a lot of teachers have set up platforms for classes to have certainly group chats or interactive dialogue where they can post questions or even assignments are posted there. Honestly, to protect my teaching certificate, I would not give my personal number to anyone, a parent or a child. Times have
Absolutely.
changed.
And these teachers, they work years for this teaching certificate, correct?
They do. Not only do they work years, then they study and take a series of tests to get their certification in Texas. So it's a shame to throw it all away for a mistake.
Absolutely. Well, this is a case that we will be following closely. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Lily Janek was released on a $50,000 bond. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.